The Letter A by Christy Brown.
Christy Brown lived from the year 1932 to 1981. He was an Irish writer and painter. Having control of only his left foot, Brown achieved international recognition and acclaim with his books My Left Foot, Down All the Days, and A Shadow on Summer. In 1989, the Oscar winning film My Left Foot, starring Daniel Day-Lewis, was made on his life. Students, do you think we often take our ability to perform day-to-day tasks for granted? In this lesson, Christy Brown, he was born with cerebral palsy, which left him with little control over his movements. What is cerebral palsy? It is a group of disorders that affect movement and muscle tone or posture. It's caused by damage that occurs to the immature developing brain, most often before birth. Now we will read an extract from his autobiography which describes the life-changing moment in his early childhood.
At this time, my mother had 5 other children to look after besides the difficult one, though as yet it was not by any means a full house. There were my brothers Jim, Tony and Paddy, and my 2 sisters, Lily and Mona, all of them very young, just a year or so between each of them, so that they were almost exactly like steps of stairs. 4 years rolled by, and I was now 5, and still as helpless as a newly born baby. While my father was out at bricklaying, earning our bread and butter for us, Mother was slowly, patiently pulling down the wall, brick by brick, that seemed to thrust itself between me and the other children, slowly, patiently, penetrating beyond the thick curtain that hung over my mind, separating it from theirs. It was hard, heartbreaking work, for often all she got from me in return was a vague smile and perhaps a faint gurgle. I could not speak or even mumble, nor could I sit up without support on my own, let alone take steps. But I wasn't inert or motionless. I seemed, indeed, to be convulsed with movement, wild, stiff, snake-like movement that never left me, except in sleep. My fingers twisted and twitched continually, my arms twined backwards and would often shoot out suddenly this way and that, and my head lolled and sagged sideways. I was a queer, crooked little fellow. Mother tells me how one day she had been sitting with me for hours in an upstairs bedroom, showing me pictures out of a great big storybook that I had got from Santa Claus last Christmas, and telling me the names of the different animals and flowers that were in them, trying without success to get me to repeat them. This had gone on for hours while she talked and laughed with me. Then, at the end of it, she leaned over me and said gently into my ear, "Did you like it, Chris? Did you like the bears and the monkeys and all the lovely flowers? Nod your head for yes, like a good boy." But I could make no sign that I had understood her. Her face was bent over mine hopefully. Suddenly, involuntarily, my queer hand reached up and grasped one of the dark curls that fell in a thick cluster about her neck. Gently, she loosened the clenched fingers, though some dark strands were still clutched between them. Then she turned away from my curious stare and left the room crying. The door closed behind her. It all seemed hopeless. It looked as though there was some justification for my relatives' contention that I was an idiot and beyond help. They now spoke of an institution. "Never," said my mother almost fiercely when this was suggested to her. "I know my boy is not an idiot. It is his body that is shattered, not his mind. I'm sure of that." Sure? Yet inwardly she prayed God would give her some proof of her faith. She knew it was one thing to believe, but quite another thing to prove. I was now 5, and still I showed no real sign of intelligence. Inside, all the family were gathered around the big kitchen fire that lit up the little room with a warm glow and made giant shadows dance on the walls and ceiling. In a corner, Mona and Paddy were sitting, huddled together, a few torn school primers before them. They were writing down little sums onto an old chipped slate using a bright piece of yellow chalk. I was close to them, propped up by a few pillows against the wall, watching. It was the chalk that attracted me so much. It was a long, slender stick of vivid yellow. I had never seen anything like it before, and it showed up so well against the black surface of the slate that I was fascinated by it, as much as if it had been a stick of gold. Suddenly, I wanted desperately to do what my sister was doing. Then, without thinking or knowing exactly what I was doing, I reached out and took the stick of chalk out of my sister's hand with my left foot. I do not know why I used my left foot to do this. It is a puzzle to many people as well as to myself. For although I had displayed a curious interest in my toes at an early age, I had never attempted before this to use either of my feet in any way. They could have been as useless to me as were my hands. That day, however, my left foot, apparently by its own volition, reached out and very impolitely took the chalk out of my sister's hand. I held it tightly between my toes and, acting on an impulse, made a wild sort of scribble with it on the slate. Next moment I stopped, a bit dazed, surprised, looking down at the stick of yellow chalk stuck between my toes, not knowing what to do with it next, hardly knowing how it got there. Then I looked up and became aware that everyone had stopped talking and was staring at me silently. Nobody stirred. Mona, her black curls framing her chubby little face, stared at me with great big eyes and open mouth. Across the open hearth, his face lit by flames, sat my father, leaning forward, hands outspread on his knees, his shoulders tense. I felt the sweat break out on my forehead. My mother came in from the pantry with a steaming pot in her hand. She stopped midway between the table and the fire, feeling the tension flowing through the room. She followed their stare and saw me in the corner. Her eyes looked from my face down to my foot, with the chalk gripped between my toes. She put down the pot. Then she crossed over to me and knelt down beside me, as she had done so many times before. "I'll show you what to do with it, Chris," she said very slowly, and in a queer choked way, her face flushed as if with some inner excitement. Taking another piece of chalk from Mona, she hesitated, then very deliberately drew on the floor in front of me the single letter A. "Copy that," she said, looking steadily at me. "Copy it, Christy." I couldn't. I looked about me, looked around at the faces that were turned towards me, tense, excited faces that were at that moment frozen, immobile, eager, waiting for a miracle in their midst. The stillness was profound. The room was full of flame and shadow that danced before my eyes and lulled my taut nerves into a sort of waking sleep. I could hear the sound of the water tap dripping in the pantry, the loud ticking of the clock on the mantel shelf, and the soft hiss and crackle of the logs on the open hearth. I tried again. I put out my foot and made a wild, jerking stab with the chalk, which produced a very crooked line and nothing more. Mother held the slate steady for me. "Try again, Chris," she whispered in my ear. "Again." I did. I stiffened my body and put my left foot out again for the third time. I drew one side of the letter. I drew half the other side. Then the stick of chalk broke, and I was left with a stump. I wanted to fling it away and give up. Then I felt my mother's hand on my shoulder. I tried once more. Out went my foot. I shook. I sweated and strained every muscle. My hands were so tightly clenched that my fingernails bit into the flesh. I set my teeth so hard that I nearly pierced my lower lip. Everything in the room swam till the faces around me were mere patches of white. But I drew it.